The FBI recovered deleted Signal messages from an iPhone. Signal uses end-to-end encryption that is, by all credible assessment, mathematically secure. The messages were deleted. Disappearing message timers had been enabled. The encryption itself was never broken, and yet the messages were recovered. This is not a story about Signal failing. Signal's encryption worked exactly as it is supposed to work. This is a story about a gap between what encrypted messaging apps promise and what the operating system underneath them is quietly doing with your message content before the encryption even becomes relevant. The gap exists because of a feature you almost certainly use every day without thinking about it: message previews on your lock screen. That line of text that appears on your screen telling you who messaged you and what they said before you unlock your phone. Displaying that preview requires the operating system to read the message content. To read it, the OS must decrypt it. And when iOS decrypts that content to display it on your lock screen, it caches a copy in a notification history log, a log that persists, a log that is accessible to forensic investigators with a court order and a copy of your device, a log that Signal has no control over because it belongs to the operating system, not to the app. This is the vulnerability. This is what was exploited. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to address it on your iPhone today. What actually happened and why it matters. When Signal sends you a message, the message travels from the sender to your phone encrypted end-to-end. Only your device has the keys to decrypt it. Signal servers never have access to the message content. This is the privacy promise that encrypted messaging makes. And in terms of the transmission and server-side storage, that promise holds. But when the message arrives on your iPhone and a notification is generated, something happens before you ever touch your phone. iOS needs to display something on your lock screen. To display the message preview, the content of the message must be decrypted from Signal's encrypted storage, read by the operating system, and displayed as text. At this point, iOS creates a record of that notification content in a system-level notification database. This database is part of the operating system's notification infrastructure. It stores notification content so that the notification center, the list of notifications you swipe down to see, has records to display. It is not an unusual or hidden feature. It is how iOS notifications work. The problem is that this database is not encrypted with the same keys that protect Signal's message database. It is accessible to forensic software that operates at the iOS system level when law enforcement has physical access to a device and appropriate technical tools. When Signal's disappearing message timer triggers and the message is deleted from Signal's own storage, Signal deletes what it controls. It cannot delete the cached copy in iOS's notification database because that database is outside Signal's jurisdiction. The operating system created it. Only the operating system can manage it. The FBI, in the case that brought this to public attention, used standard mobile device forensics to extract the notification database from the seized iPhone. The cached message previews were there, readable, despite the messages having been deleted from Signal. Signal's encryption was never touched. It remains intact, but the encryption protected a layer that was bypassed by the time the notification cache was created, the setting that changes everything. The solution to this specific vulnerability is a settings change that takes approximately 30 seconds and that you should make right now if you have not already. Open Settings on your iPhone, tap Notifications. At the top of the notification settings, you will see a setting called Show Previews. Tap it. You will see three options: Always, which shows notification content on the lock screen regardless of whether the phone is locked; When unlocked, which shows notification content only after you have authenticated with Face ID, Touch ID, or your passcode; and Never, which shows only that a notification exists without displaying any content. Currently, if you have never changed this setting, it is almost certainly set to Always. This is the default because it is the most convenient setting from a user experience perspective. Change it to When Unlocked or to Never. When you change this setting to When Unlocked, the notification preview does not appear on the lock screen. And therefore, the OS does not need to cache the decrypted content to display it while the phone is locked. When you authenticate and unlock the phone, iOS can display notifications, but the sensitive window when content was being cached before authentication is now closed. Never provides the most complete protection. No content is displayed or cached at the notification level regardless of the phone's lock state. The trade-off is convenience. You will no longer be able to glance at your phone and read a message without unlocking it first. You will see the sender's name or the app name, but not the message content. For most people, the question of whether that convenience is worth the privacy exposure is a straightforward one once they understand what the exposure actually is. This setting applies globally to all apps by default. You can also set it per app for more granular control. Go to Settings, Notifications, select any specific app, and you will see a Show Previews option for that app that can override the global setting. Not just Signal. Every messaging app was affected. The vulnerability affects every application that generates lock screen notifications with message content, WhatsApp messages, iMessage, Telegram. Any application that displays notification previews on the lock screen is creating entries in iOS's notification database when those previews are generated. The encryption properties of any specific application are irrelevant at the notification layer because the content has to be decrypted to be displayed. This means that if you use WhatsApp with end-to-end encryption, if you use iMessage with its encryption, if you use Telegram in any configuration, all of these applications have been creating notification cache entries on your device that are accessible through the same forensic pathway that was used to recover the Signal messages. The framing of this as a Signal story is understandable because Signal is the application most associated with the expectation of complete privacy. When people choose Signal specifically for privacy-sensitive communications, they are often relying on its encryption to provide comprehensive protection. The notification cache vulnerability reveals that the protection is not as comprehensive as the encryption promise suggests, but the same vulnerability exists for every messaging application on your phone. The change to show preview settings should be made not just for Signal, but as a global setting that applies to all applications with sensitive notification content. The April 2026 patch and its limitations. Apple released security patches addressing this notification caching behavior on April 22nd, 2026. The relevant updates are iOS 26.4.2 and iOS 18.7.8. If you have applied either of these updates, the specific mechanism that created the exploitable notification cache has been addressed in the update. Apple modified how iOS handles notification content for applications that mark their notifications as sensitive, reducing the window during which decrypted content is cached at the system level. The settings change described above remains relevant even on patched devices because the underlying architecture of how notifications work has not fundamentally changed. Settings show previews to when unlocked or never reduces the creation of sensitive notification content in the notification database, whether or not you're on a patched version of iOS. For users on older iPhones that are no longer receiving security updates. This is more serious. Apple provides iOS security updates only for devices that remain on its supported hardware list. Older devices, specifically those that cannot run the iOS versions receiving the April 2026 patch, remain permanently exposed to this caching behavior because the patch will never be delivered to them. If you are using an iPhone that is no longer receiving security updates, the Show Previews settings change is your primary available mitigation. It does not address all potential notification-related vulnerabilities on an unpatched device, but it addresses the specific mechanism that was exploited in the documented case. This is a broader point about mobile device security that applies beyond this specific vulnerability. When a device is no longer receiving security updates, vulnerabilities that are discovered and patched for current devices remain permanently present in that device's software. The security posture of an old unpatched device degrades over time as more vulnerabilities are discovered that it will never be protected against. Understanding the threat model, who this affects most. The notification cache vulnerability requires physical access to the device. An attacker cannot remotely exploit this vulnerability to read your notification cache. They need your phone, along with either your passcode or forensic tools, sophisticated enough to bypass authentication. This means the threat model for this vulnerability is different from typical remote attack scenarios. For most people, the primary threat from this vulnerability is physical device seizure. Law enforcement with a court order and access to your device. A thief who steals your phone and either knows your passcode or has access to professional forensic tools. Someone who has temporary physical access to your device. This distinction matters for understanding who should be most concerned about this vulnerability and who should treat the settings change as particularly urgent. Journalists who communicate with confidential sources through encrypted messaging applications have a specific concern here. If a journalist's phone is seized by law enforcement during an investigation, the notification cache provides a pathway to message content that would otherwise be inaccessible. The source protection that encrypted messaging is supposed to provide is undermined if the content was ever displayed as a lock screen notification. Lawyers communicating with clients about privileged matters face similar concerns. Attorney-client privilege in legal contexts is supposed to protect communications from discovery in legal proceedings. Communications through encrypted apps with notification previews enabled may have left traces in the notification cache that privilege did not protect. Activists and human rights workers operating in environments where their devices might be seized by authorities have the most acute version of this concern. The protection that encrypted messaging is supposed to provide in these contexts is specifically undermined by the notification cache. For ordinary users whose primary concern is a thief who steals their phone, The risk is more limited because forensic tools sophisticated enough to extract the notification database are not typically available to petty thieves. The more immediate risk from a stolen phone is the thief accessing content directly if they can unlock the phone. The convenience gap and how incidental data accumulates. This vulnerability illustrates a principle that applies more broadly than this specific case, and that is worth understanding for anyone who uses privacy tools. Encryption protects what it is applied to. It does not protect the trails that the underlying system creates to enable convenient features. Convenience features are designed to make your experience smoother. Notification previews mean you do not have to unlock your phone to see who messaged you. But enabling that convenience requires the system to read and cache content. The cache that enables the convenience becomes a data trail that persists beyond what the encrypted app intended. The pattern repeats across many technology contexts. Backup systems that capture encrypted app content before it can be cleared. Clipboard history features that retain copied text from secure applications. Screenshot functions that capture screen content from privacy-focused apps. Each convenience feature creates what security researchers call incidental data, information that is created not as the primary function of the system, but as a side effect of enabling some other feature. Incidental data accumulates in places that are not always obvious, persists for longer than intended, and can be accessed through pathways that the encrypted application was never designed to protect against. The encryption that Signal, WhatsApp, and other applications provide protects the specific data. Those applications store in their own encrypted containers. It does not and cannot protect the incidental data that iOS or Android creates when it handles notifications, backups, clipboard content, or other system-level functions that interact with that data. Understanding this gap does not mean abandoning encrypted messaging applications. These applications provide real and important protection for the data they control. It means understanding that the protection is not absolute and that the operating system layer underneath any application creates its own data trails that require separate consideration. The FBI recovered Signal messages that were supposed to be deleted because iOS cached a decrypted copy when it displayed a notification preview on the lock screen. Signal's encryption did not fail. The convenience feature created an incidental data trail that persisted after the message was deleted from Signal's storage. The fix is 3 taps: Settings, Notifications, Show Previews, When Unlocked, or Never. Install the April 2026 security patch if you have not. If your device cannot receive it, the settings change is your primary mitigation. Understand that this vulnerability was not unique to Signal. Every messaging application that displayed notification previews on your lock screen was creating the same type of cached content. And understand the broader principle that encryption protects what it controls and cannot protect. The incidental data that the operating system creates to enable the convenience features you may have never thought twice about. The message preview on your lock screen was never free. It cost a copy of your message in a database you probably did not know existed. Now you do. Change the setting.